All right, Dr. Andrews said, Aaron Wendt with Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. I'm going to talk about the Shoreline Erosion Advisory Service, which is a resource for shoreline landowners and communities. And just like Daryl, I'm with Department of Conservation and Recreation. I want to talk about three things about SEAS and entitled Shorelines in Virginia, and then I want to hit on shoreline management and how it relates to the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Implementation Plan. Then I want to talk about a grant that we've received about a year ago to help us accelerate living shoreline implementation in rural coastal Virginia. So to get started, SEAS, Shoreline Erosion Advisory Service, we've been around since 1980, so we've been here serving citizens of the Commonwealth for over 40 years. What we do basically at the most basic level is we provide science-based technical assistance on shoreline management choices. And we provide that service to both private property owners as well as public land management agencies like the counties, if it's a county park, or, we've been to state parks and federal properties as well. And historically, we were only focused on tidal shorelines, but many years ago, we expanded, and we'll go out to other areas of the state as well and look at non-tidal stream banks and impoundments. And what we do, what services we provide, we will go on site and we'll talk with that landowner about their erosion issue, about trying to help them understand what may be driving that erosion issue. And we'll talk about potential solutions and what can be done about it. So it's on-site, direct technical assistance to that property owner. We almost always follow that up with a written advisory report with recommended solutions. We include all types of resources to help them make their decision, lists of potential contractors, template schematics, other resources to help them with our recommendations. We can also review construction designs and engineering plans for shoreline stabilization solutions. We can't do a design for someone, but we can review it and provide another set of eyes on it. An objective, third party that doesn't have an interest in it. We're not the designer being paid to do it, or the contractor that's going to do the work. So we can provide that third set of eyes for that property owner. And the same thing, we can do construction inspections. We can go out at the request of that landowner, and while their contractor is building their shoreline solution, we can look at it and let that landowner know, yes, your contractor is building it pretty close to the design and the permit that you've received, or he's way off and you should probably have a conversation with your contractor. And finally, we can provide guidance on the available financial incentive programs for shoreline stabilization practices. And the best thing for property owners is that, it's a no-cost service provided to them through DCR. So the next series of slides, I want to talk about these particular services and specifically how we apply them and talk about them with the individual landowner. So, how do landowners find SEAS and seek advice? So they might have their marsh that's being undercut and falling off into the bay or the river. They may have huge, large trees that have calved off and taken a huge chunk of their bank with it. And they're not sure what to do. Or even worse, they've got a 20, 30, 40-foot bluff that has had a catastrophic bank failure, and now their house is in jeopardy. Or maybe this is what their neighbor had, and they're worried about it happening to them. Or even worse, their house has already become damaged. And so, property owners have these issues and these concerns, and they don't know where to go or what to do. They don't know what the laws and the rules are. And so hopefully they find us, and we go out there and we can do a in-person site visit. And we've got to talk to that property owner and help them understand that erosion really is a natural process, and that what drives that erosion issue is mostly wind-driven waves, but other things like sea level rise and boat wakes and other things can contribute to that. And being a natural ecosystem process, it does have benefits. Erosion of some banks provides sand downstream to beaches and marshes and helps those beaches and marshes grow and maintain in the threat of sea level rise. But on the other side of things, too much sediment can have impacts to the bay from a water quality perspective. The range of shoreline erosion in Virginia is quite large. There's some areas that have lost as much as 30 feet per year. Some areas like a beach gaining sand as much as 10 feet. So it's a really large range. And so when we're on site with that property owner, it's really one of our challenges is to give them some perspective on what is happening on their property compared to other areas along their reach of shoreline and, across the entire bay. And so we use a resource at VIMS, Scott Hardaway's shoreline change data, and he's looked at historic erosion rates since 1937. And, he's done his best to draw the shorelines in 37 to 2017, and then he's color coded those erosion rates. And so we talk really in detail with that property owner about this historic rate of change compared to what they may have seen in the last 1, 2, 3 years, which is what they're calling us about is the recent erosion of what they've seen. Dr. Mitchell talked about this a little bit about wetlands migrating in the face of sea level rise, and so this is an important discussion we have with those property owners about how their existing marsh can fight sea level rise and help defend their property. And so helping them understand that process is important when we're talking to those property owners. And then also just understanding that risk, that hazard that they have, both as individuals and their property and their infrastructure, but also as their community and their vulnerability to shoreline erosion and other coastal hazards. But it's important that they understand that, because when a property owner understands their risk and they understand their historic erosion rate, then they can really make a better informed decision about if they need to spend their money to implement some type of shoreline erosion stabilization practice, or if they're really not at a great risk as they thought they were. And so that we spend a lot of time with individual property owners talking about those things before we even get to particular options and solutions. So sometimes that landowner doesn't call us, right? Doesn't call any resource that they could reach out to. They try to do some type of quick fix that they think is the best opportunity for them. And so we've seen things like this, tires laid on the bank or slabs of broken concrete, both of which these quick fixes really aren't going to solve the issue. So when we're on site with that property owner, another challenge that we have to overcome is helping them understand the law and the regulations and who has jurisdiction in what areas. And so I think most of us on this workshop today understand this slide pretty well, but it's challenging to help that landowner. They have a challenge to understand these different jurisdictions and who is going to tell them what they can and can't do on their property and their shoreline. And so again, we spend some time with them helping them understand these different jurisdictions and what these entities are more likely to be, favorable for, what type of shoreline solution they're going to favor. And if you aren't already aware, the landscape for shoreline stabilization changed about 2 years ago statutorily, and then a year ago VMRC changed the regulations. So living shoreline really now is the de facto permitting approach to stabilizing the shoreline. So we really have to help these property owners understand that just because their neighbor got a new bulkhead or riprap on their bank a couple of years ago, that may not be within the bounds of the current regulatory approach. And so some property owners have a challenge accepting the new regulations. And so we try to help them through that process and understand how they can still have a viable solution. And so what are those solutions? We spend great amount of effort talking about the range of solutions that are appropriate for that particular site, for that landowner, ranging from those green living shoreline approaches up to, a situation where a bulkhead may be appropriate or riprap may still be appropriate in some situations. And so we talk about these different options with those property owners and then help them zero in on what's going to work for them. And in that discussion, for Living Shorelines at least, we do spend quite a bit of time talking about the benefits and the advantages of a living shoreline, to reduce flood impacts, the water quality benefits, how it will help their marshes that they do have continue to grow and fight sea level rise. And so we spend time with that landowner talking about those benefits as well. And so once that landowner is ready to do something to address their erosion issue, what are the details of that plan, that site-specific solution? And we do tell them that there's guidance out there, and that under some situations, an individual landowner can sketch out their plan and apply for a permit. But there's professionals out there that they can hire to do their design for them. There are design standards that can help them address all the different factors that need to be considered in a shoreline solution. But as a reminder, we emphasize that we're there to help them too. We can review those plans and provide direction on a plan to help just tweak it, make it a little bit better. So throughout the rest of this presentation, I do have just a few slides to just kind of jump in the middle and break things up. Some examples of living shorelines. Here's an example of one towards high tide, and so you can see how the high tide is already behind the sill, which is the riprap there, and it's flooded the marsh behind the sill. So this is at high tide. You can see a gap in between the rock there for fish access and other marine fauna to get to that marsh. Here's an example of a living shoreline. You can see, you can't see the rock, but there's rock there in front of the marsh. Let's see if my cursor's working here. There's rock over here, but because this marsh has grown up, where they brought in sand and they planted this marsh, and it's grown up. And so from this angle, a property owner can't even see that rock really that's out there protecting their new marsh habitat. So when we look at a design and provide comment to property owners, now more than ever, both because of the threat of sea level rise, like Dr. Mitchell talked about, but also because of the change in regulations at VMRC, these designs really need to look at that, look at the potential change in their high tides and sea level rise, and look at the solution that's being proposed, and if it's going to be adaptable or not, or if they're going to have a whole nother challenge 20, 50 years from now. And so we try to help the property owner understand that, and we make comments to that effect when we review designs and plans. And so, at a minimum, the takeaway that we try to instill in property owners is that whatever choice they pick on their property, if they can minimize the wave energy that's attacking their shoreline, if they can help marshes hold on to as much sediment that's coming off the bank as possible, if they can provide a way for their marshes to migrate in face of sea level rise, then their solution is likely going to work and be a long-term solution that's resilient for their particular shoreline. But it's also important that we help these property owners understand that no solution, a living shoreline, a bulkhead, no solution is install and walk away. All of these shoreline solutions have maintenance requirements and needs, and it's important that the property owners realize that and understand the differences in what those maintenance needs might be. So the last service that we provide to property owners is trying to help them understand what financial incentives are out there for shoreline work. And there never has been any funds really to help individuals, but with living shorelines many years ago becoming the preferred approach and now the de facto permitting approach, the Commonwealth has put in place actually quite a few financial incentive programs that are focused on living shorelines. There's others that do other things that can be used for natural nature-based features like living shorelines, which is what Daryl talked about, the Community Flood Fund. But the ones I want to talk about are really uniquely specific to living shorelines. And so the VMRC, there is a streamlined permitting option. So some living shorelines can qualify for general permits and a streamlined approach, which makes it easier to get that permit and start work. There are low interest loans for residences and businesses and public properties from DEQ. And the example is that the DEQ Living Shoreline Program provides localities the opportunity to take a loan out to work on living shorelines. And then that locality can choose to take that loan out for one of two reasons. They can take a loan out to work on their public property, right? So think about a county park on the shoreline. And so the county has taken out a loan to work on a park, and James City County over on the peninsula is an example of that. They took a loan out. The other option is that a locality or a governmental entity like a PDC can take a loan out and then pass it through to the individual constituents. And that's what the Middle Peninsula PDC has already done. I think they've taken out two $250,000 loans, so basically $500,000 that they've taken out as loans from DEQ, and they've passed those out to landowners across the Middle Peninsula to do living shoreline work, and it's been highly successful. And most of the money has been taken already and turned into living shorelines in the Middle Peninsula. There's also low interest loans for agricultural properties through the DEQ Agricultural Loan Program. And so it's a different dollar figure, and these monies can actually be loaned to the individual ag producer directly. And then there's cost share grants available on residential property. And so the soil and water conservation districts all across Virginia created a program called the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program. One of the practices that are fundable is living shorelines, and VCAP is quite popular. It has been historically popular in the Middle Peninsula for living shorelines. The Northern Neck has been very popular for living shorelines with this funding, and it provides, this year, it provides up to $30,000 at an 80% reimbursement rate for individual property owners to install living shoreline. So it's become more lucrative this year. They just doubled that amount from last year. And then again, on agricultural properties, there's cost share and tax credits through a DCR program, the Agricultural Cost Share Program, and shoreline stabilization is one of the eligible practices. This program, these cost share and tax credits have been around for years, working on nutrient management and cover crops. But just a few years ago, the program opened it up to shoreline stabilization as well. And so ag producers can get cost share and tax credits for shoreline work. And then there may be a property tax exemption if a locality hasn't put up a roadblock to that, to get that property tax exemption, local property tax exemption. So we help the property owner understand that if they choose a living shoreline, there's help out there. But if they choose to try to get a bulkhead or a revetment, there's no financial incentive programs, and they may have a regulatory roadblock to get past. And so this is a critical discussion we have. And if they do end up being involved with a VCAP living shoreline or an agricultural cost share living shoreline, SEAS continues to be involved with that property owner through those programs. We work through those programs to provide that construction assistance and design review. So let's break it up here with an example. Again, here's a living shoreline that was just finished in this picture. But this one's not rock. This one's actually built with oyster shell, shucked oyster shell in a bag there. And so the hope and intent is that oysters will colonize that and lock that in to be a living reef sill shoreline stabilization. You can barely make out the new marsh grasses that were planted in these rows along this particular shoreline and in this new sand that was brought in to stabilize the shoreline back up in this area. Here's an example that was completed almost a year ago, maybe a little more than a year ago, Belle Isle State Park on the Rappahannock, and you can see the sill structures, almost breakwater structures, and I think this is a low tide picture. and it was put in to stabilize this eroding bank in front of the visitor center at the state park. So I want to shift real quickly to a couple slides and talk about shoreline management and the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Improvement Plan. So this plan, is guiding our actions at the agency level and at the individual property level, locality level, to implement BMPs to reduce nutrients and sediment that are negatively impacting Chesapeake Bay. And so that plan has a whole host of actions and practices in there, which I'm sure everyone on this workshop is familiar with some of them, but there's also one in there for shoreline management. And there's basin specific goals, and those include living shoreline. So here you can see that the goal for the WIP for shoreline management is 500,000 new linear feet of shoreline stabilization practices, including living shorelines. So where are we on that goal? Or let me back up. I should say, how do we account for that and credit those nutrient reductions that we achieve? So it's a fairly straightforward method that, if we have a shoreline, we know how long that shoreline is, we know how tall their bank is, and if they implement some practice, a living shoreline or riprap, we know the erosion rate. We can get to those reductions. We can show or demonstrate sediment, nitrogen, and phosphorus reductions from some shoreline stabilization practice. So where are we on that? SEAS has reported just over 1,400 projects or sites for shoreline management. Almost over 55 miles of new shoreline practices put in since 2008. This by no means accounts for everything that's been implemented. These are only the ones that we've been able to verify and that meet the Chesapeake Bay, the rules and parameters for reporting these BMPs. And so what that looks like from a basin perspective goal, as you can see here, we have some basins like the James who are over 80% of their goal. Some, like the Eastern Shore, are not quite that far along. As a whole, we're sitting at nearly 60% of our goal for this particular WIP goal with shoreline management. So I think with 2 or 3 years left here, it's achievable if we continue to get property owners to implement living shorelines and providing those resources to get them to make these choices and take advantage of these grant programs and loan programs so that we can then report the actions that they're taking are critical. Here's an example at Westmoreland State Park. These are breakwaters installed on the Potomac River. You can see the breakwater, sand behind that breakwater, a recreational beach. You can kind of make out a little triangle here and here and here of planted vegetation. This is what a breakwater might look like on the ground. And so you can see there's an area behind the beach that's been fenced off, and the vegetation is holding that sand in place. And so breakwater with sand and planted vegetation behind it is also a living shoreline. And so we do have living shoreline options on high wave energy environments. So how do we accelerate living shoreline implementation in rural coastal Virginia? And so to help with that, we applied for and received a grant about a year ago from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation to help us do that. And so it's a 3-year grant. So now through summer 2024, we've got $1 million to get on the ground. And where we're working is right here in the Middle Peninsula, as well as the Northern Neck and Eastern Shore. But that's how we define rural coastal Virginia for the purposes of our grant. That's where we're working, right here. What we're trying to do is work with all those entities that are out there doing living shoreline work now, the soil and water conservation districts through VCAP. The PDC in the Middle Peninsula is heavily involved with the loan program. The York River and Small Coastal Basin Roundtable has a committee that is focused on habitat restoration, including living shorelines. And so working with these entities to enhance what they're already doing and be more strategic about it, and work with this existing partnership to create a strategic approach to achieving that WIP goal. And so that's a major objective here for us. We've also found that the larger living shoreline projects, maybe not an individual property owner, but a larger reach, multiple property owners together, or maybe a county park or something like that, it's challenging to get enough financial incentives to do the work. And so there are a lot of other grant programs out there that fund living shorelines, and we found one barrier is that there's not a design already. Without that design, we can't apply for an appropriate amount of grant funds. And so we have some funds here to help Scott Hardaway at VIMS design maybe 12 to 15 living shoreline projects. And so this list is not finished or complete at this point. So if any of the localities on board this call, this workshop, know of particular sites where they have multiple properties that are along a reach that need a design, or one of the county parks needs a design, we can put you all on this list and talk about that. And Scott would do the design, and then we'd have, the partners would have this design ready to go to find other financial incentives to implement it. A significant portion of the money is to go the next step in this grant. We do have some funds to actually build some living shorelines, but only on residential, socially vulnerable sites. So again, this is not locked down yet where we're going to do this. And so if there's sites, we've talked with Louis Lawrence and Kurt Smith at the PDC about the Fight the Flood program and some of their priorities. And so we're pinning down where we want to do these designs and ultimately spend these funds. And so this is not envisioned as an individual property owner, with 100 linear feet of shoreline, but more of a reach scale, multiple property owners, medium to higher wave energy environments. And so we have some opportunities here to actually construct some. And then, like I said earlier, we're going to continue verifying what has already been implemented and reporting those goals. So to wrap this up, just 2 slides here about an example. This is a project on the Rappahannock side, or the northern neck side of the Rappahannock. There were 4 property owners here, actually. You can see one house. There's not a house built here. And then this property owner, they got together, and this little curve, this beach was eating back into all these property owners' shorelines, and they got together and they implemented a solution, one design, one permit. They really didn't get too much financial incentives to help them. They built this mostly on their own. Friends of the Rappahannock did help with planting the beach grasses and dune grasses back here, but you can see they put in 3 sills and a spur here, and now they've got a stabilized beach. But this was a really successful project in that it crossed property lines and it provided a uniform solution across several parcels, which is something Daryl talked about briefly a minute ago. So this is a really interesting project, and I can talk about details of that if you're interested. So that's what I've got. Questions?